Good evening. I'm Chuck Todd of NBC News. We're here in Columbus, Ohio. But at a time of scarce resources and budget deficits, we could be in any state capital or even, of course, in Washington, D.C. The fundamental questions on issue 2, how should governments balance their budgets, and what are the rights and importance of the public sector worker in today's economy? In just 2 weeks, you will render a judgment, an outcome that will be the backdrop for budget fights all over the country, as well as for next year's presidential election. And as Ohioans know all too well, this is among the most important of battleground states. Joining me tonight are the panelists: Colleen Marshall of WCMH here in Columbus, Tom Barris of WKYC in Cleveland, and Cherie Palello of WLWT in Cincinnati. And now, tonight's participants. Representing We Are Ohio, which is advocating a no vote on issue 2, is former Ohio Congressman Dennis Eckert. Representing Building a Better Ohio, which is urging a yes vote on issue 2, State Senator Keith Faber. Gentlemen. A quick rundown of the rules of this hour-long debate. For each question, the participant gets 90 seconds to answer, followed by a 90-second response from the opposition. 30 seconds for a rebuttal if warranted. As moderator, I have the discretion to ask follow-up questions. Due to the results from a coin toss, Mr. Eckert gives the first opening statement and gets the first question. Mr. Faber gives the final closing remarks. Mr. Eckert, your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Seldom in the history of Ohio have the people had such a unique opportunity to stand and be counted. The citizens' veto of Senate Bill 5 gives us one of our most cherished opportunities and responsibilities in a decade. Issue 2 is unsafe, and it's unfair, and it hurts us all. That's why the choice has never been so clear. Now is the time to stand with our local heroes, our neighbors, our friends, to ensure that they have the tools to protect themselves and our families. By voting no on issue 2, we can veto Senate Bill 5, a politically motivated law that is both unfair and unsafe. It's unfair because it creates second-class citizens out of public servants. It erodes local control. It silences the voice of our public officials at the bargaining table, a voice that they know created the problem only because of the consequences of greed on Wall Street. It turns ultimately collective bargaining into collective begging. It's unsafe. We know when that smoke alarm screams or that chest pain stabs, that minutes can become a lifetime, seconds an eternity. Just ask Grandma Marlene Quinn from Cincinnati. Senate Bill 5 denies to our trained professionals the right to fight for the tools and the training that they need to protect themselves and us. Now, from the beginning, when Governor Kasich proposed this law, it has been driven much more by politics and payback than policy. Senate Bill 5 is not only bad for what it does, but how they did it. In the rush to silence the voice of public employees, Governor Kasich and his legislative leaders first silenced the public by padlocking the State House doors, and as if that wasn't bad enough, then removed responsible Republicans from key committees in their haste to ram this bill through the process. But the only way they can get away with it is if we let them. Here are the facts. Ohio public employees already have helped the state and communities by giving back more than $1 billion. They already pay the 15% required or suggested by the bill, and more than 94% of all of Ohio's employees pay their legally required shares of their pensions. You know, though, it's not just about the numbers. It's sad to think about the fact that most nurses, most paramedics, most social workers never took the job to get rich. Their lives, their jobs have been to nurture, to save, and to serve. Now it's our turn to help them. Vote no on issue 2. Help our heroes. They are there for us. We need to be there for them.
Thank you, Mr. Faber.
Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to watch this important debate. I want to thank the NBC affiliates. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Chuck, for coming out and helping us have this very important discussion tonight. You know, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Keith Faber. I'm a state senator from Western Ohio. I am the son of Joe Faber, who's a retired highway patrolman. I'm the son of Pat Faber, who's a retired nurse for the Veterans Administration. I'm married to Andrea, and she's a teacher. You know, public service runs deep in my veins. And, you know, it's those values to respect that public service that my mom and dad tried to really influence in me and in my brother who works for the Department of Defense and my sister who's also a teacher. It's those same values that Andrea and I want to instill in our kids as we go forward to talk about where their future is going to be. So I want to make it very clear tonight that this is not an attack on government workers. This is not about a value judgment for government employees. This is simply about a math problem. In the last 4 years, Ohio has lost 400,000 jobs. That's 400,000 fewer Ohioans who can contribute and pay taxes towards our ever-expanding state government. 80% of public budgets in this state are now consumed by labor costs alone, much of which is used to fund fringe benefits that are much better than the ones you get. Fringe benefits like low-cost, no-cost health care and pensions, excessive paid time off, and cash-out bonuses that are costing the city of Cincinnati $93 million this year alone. You know, doing business as usual has led to government employee wages and benefits that have increased much faster than the median household income in this state, and by definition, that's the income for the middle class. That's the income for you. This has led to a system to where we are continually faced with bad choices to lay off teachers and firefighters and police officers, or to increase taxes, new levies, and limit government services. You know, opponents of Issue 2 want to believe, or have you believe, that this is a new problem. It is not. In just the 6 years before the current administration took office, we've had over 6,000 levies in Ohio. What is new, however, is that Ohio has reached a tipping point. We can no longer continue business as usual because simply we can't afford it. Something has to change, and voting yes on Issue 2 is a better way. You know, the opponents of Issue 2 want to continue to play politics. Congressman Eckert and his side have focused on emotion and hype. Why? Because they don't want change. To avoid change, they have to use scare tactics that the newspapers across Ohio have called false and intellectually dishonest. Tonight, Ohioans, we have a choice. We can continue to do business as usual and then not be surprised when we end up with the same results, or we can embrace the very reasonable reforms in State Issue 2, like asking government employees to pay 15% for the cost of their health care, or asking government employees to pay 10% towards their guaranteed lifetime pensions. I encourage you to listen to the facts tonight. And when you do, I will be asking you to vote yes on Issue 2. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. And now we hope we got the talking points out of the way, and you will answer our questions and answer these questions that have been submitted. Mr. Eckert, I'm going to start with you. Brand new poll out today. It's gotten a lot of coverage here in Ohio. Shows a majority of voters taking your side, and that indeed they may very well repeal SB 5, vote no on Issue 2. If that happens and it holds true, doesn't that mean you're going to see cities have to potentially lay off teachers, raise taxes, or both to meet these budget shortfalls?
Well, Chuck, I was not surprised by that poll because it started with a poll of real Ohioans who raised their pens and voices, 1.3 million of them, in an unprecedented number, to say no to politicians out of touch with their constituents. I'm not surprised by that poll because I, too, watched Governor Kasich campaign against Governor Strickland and do nothing but blame him for job loss and promise, in his own words, to be jobs number one. I'm not surprised by that poll because we believe, as we see politicians continuing to promise one thing before the election and do something else after the election once they have won. It was amazing that within days of his election, the first thing Governor Kasich said was that he intended to break the back of the public teachers unions up in Ashtabula in the Star Beacon. And then, performing a pivot that would have been worthy of a LeBron James move, the first piece of legislation he suggested attacked collective bargaining and public employees. Public employees did not create this problem. It was created by the avarice and greed of Wall Street. My opponent suggests it's a math problem. It truly is a math problem because Governor Kasich and his allies, while they were increasing the state budget by almost $5 billion, took $3.5 billion from state and local government. I know we're a few days from Halloween, but a governor who masquerades as Robin Hood, taking from those who need it, our local government, to fatten the wallets of those who don't in Columbus, is why we see those polls.
You don't believe local governments are going to have to raise taxes or lay off teachers?
I think that is an incredibly false choice. It's an issue they're dealing with every day in the context of the current collective bargaining law.
Okay, Mr. Faber.
It's incredible as we listen to this whole discussion tonight that they don't have a plan. Their plan is maybe increase taxes, maybe the status quo is just good enough. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's not good enough. It's not good enough for the teachers and firefighters and police officers who are going to be laid off if Issue 2 is repealed. That's a given. We've got 6,000 levies before John Kasich became governor, and that's a continuing problem. In the last 10 years, we've had thousands of teachers and police officers and firefighters laid off in this state. Again, it's because of a math problem. It's not because of John Kasich. It's not because of anything that's happened since the budget went into place in July. The reality is that this is a problem that's been coming at for a long time. It's a problem that's been recognized by Ohio commentators all over the state. It's a problem that we can fix. We can level the playing field by putting the taxpayers at the table. You know, this is your money, ladies and gentlemen. You can keep having new levies to continue to pay benefits that are out of touch with those you receive, or we can do something about it. We can pass Issue 2. And that's the debate. That's what this question's all about. Can we do better for our kids and our future? Absolutely. That's why I ask you to vote yes on Issue 2.
Tom has the next question for Mr. Faber.
Mr. Faber, why did Governor Kasich and Republicans in the legislature single out public unions to make these sacrifices during these hard times? More than 20,000 state and local government jobs in Ohio have disappeared over the last 2 years. Unions can document they have made more than $1 billion in concessions and givebacks. Why weren't others, including office holders, asked to share in the sacrifice more? You know, the state Senate has given some of its staff members significant raises. The governor's cabinet members all make significantly more than their predecessors did. Where is the spirit of equity in the sacrifice here?
Great question, and thank you for asking it. You know, this issue is all about even-handedness. You know, every state employee in this state, including every legislator, already pays 15% for the cost of their health care, already pays their 10% employee share towards their pension if they get it. The fact is that this issue is a hype. It's a straw man that's been argued by the other side that somehow there's an exemption. That's an argument that the Cleveland Plain Dealer just said was plain false. The legislature didn't exempt themselves from this bill. From that perspective, it is important that we talk about why this is necessary. You see, government employment in this state is a major cost driver. It's the reason we're seeing levies go up all over the state. It's the reason that we're having a tough time recruiting and keeping good public sector and private sector employees in this state. If we can't get our cost structure under control, we're going to have a difficult time attracting and retaining the next generation of jobs, the jobs that my 4-year-old and 6-year-old are going to need to rely on for Ohio's future. And that's what this comes down to. Can we balance the table, put taxpayers in a position to where we can have some reasonable reforms and give them the ability to say what's reasonable and not with regard to our public sector employees?
Well, Tom, you're right. More than $1.1 billion has already been given by every public employee back in terms of pay cuts and benefit reductions. In Solon, in Perrysburg, in Hudson, each of the teachers in those cities have given back pay raises as well as step increases going back to 2008. Now, it is true that when we talk about shared sacrifice, and the state of Ohio raises its budget by $5 billion, and local government has to cut its budget by $3.5 billion, the issue simply is that all they have done is shifted the responsibility, but not the dollars, from Columbus to the local government. Look, who should sacrifice? It is true, only the governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, our attorney general, our treasurer are the only people who receive guaranteed pay raises. At the same time, the state legislature gives exorbitant pay raises to all of its employees within days of passing Senate Bill 5. What we do know is that 90% of the cuts and contracts negotiated this year contain massive givebacks. 95% make those givebacks last more than 2 years. Our public employees have been unfairly singled out for a problem that they didn't create. It began on Wall Street. It was exacerbated by the critical budget cuts passed by the state legislature. And at the end of the day, this Robin Hood approach from local government to Columbus has to stop.
I got a quick 30-second follow-up for both of you. Mr. Eckert, any part of SB 5, which of course is the yes vote on Issue 2, any part that unions are willing to accept?
Without a doubt. We actually made significant inroads when the Chamber of Commerce and the Ohio Business Roundtable agreed with the unions and Governor Strickland, and so did Senator Faber in passing House Bill 1, the Educational Opportunity Act, where we limited tenure. We made significant management improvements, which, as Tom knows, is exactly what Mayor Jackson asked for in Cleveland. We set up a mentoring program and a licensing program. And after we won a national award and almost $500 million to pay for it, they kept the dough, voted no, and did what Kasich told them.
Right. Mr. Faber, the reverse question. Any part of SB 5 that you think went too far that you're now willing to say, you know what, we should have backed off?
Well, one of the things that I ask every group who testified in front of the committee, I sat and heard over 20 hours of testimony, and I ask everyone, what do you like about the current collective bargaining law? What about the current collective bargaining law do you want to see changed? What about the Senate Bill 5 do you like? And what about Senate Bill 5 do you want to see changed? I only got one suggestion. One suggestion came from the president of the Cleveland Union, and his comment to me was, we'd like to see peer review as part of the overall performance-based compensation system. You know, we put it in there. If we had other good suggestions, I'm sure we could include them.
You don't think any of it went too far, though?
Well, again, we want to hear their suggestions. They said no, repeal the bill. If they've got good suggestions, we'll listen because, frankly, there are probably some things we could do differently in the bill.
Colleen's got the next question for Mr. Eckert.
And Mr. Eckert, with their 401ks losing value, private sector workers are now being told they will probably have to work far beyond the age of 65. But Ohio teachers, police, and firefighters are often eligible for full retirement benefits after 30 years of service, meaning they get to retire sometimes in their early to mid-50s. Why should taxpayers fund these generous retirement packages?
Well, let's also keep in mind that the one thing that public employees do not get is Social Security, which also has age opportunities for retirement, as well as disability questions for retirement. So the issue is that the public employee pension process is not unlike the Social Security process. The point, though, that Senator Faber made is not that public employees haven't given, it's that somehow they have given and are getting way too much. This obtuse study that came out 6 months after they introduced the bill to justify the passage of the bill in April that suggests there is an egregious pay difference between public and private employees is pure bunk. If, in fact, you had looked at the Ohio Bureau of Labor Statistics or had taken a hard look at our own Ohio Department of Taxation, what we have seen that the statistics already tell us is that public employees, unlike your question suggests, already pay a significant amount not only of their pension and their benefits, but contribute in ways beyond simply the pay that they receive. I don't know a single firefighter who thinks about his pension when that alarm bell goes off, or a cop in a car by himself when he turns down that dark alley worried about what in fact his pension check is about. This is about public service. And when we try to negate the contribution that they make to the safety of our citizens simply by trying to balance the back on the basis of their paychecks, while we create corporate loopholes, is inconsistent with the way we should treat Ohio.
Mr. Faber.
Again, I think it's important we get back to the question. You know, this is a system in Ohio that allows government workers to have a guaranteed lifetime pension that allows them to retire at 48 or 50 or 52, depending on what system they're in. That's inconsistent with the benefits in the private sector. And what we did in issue 2 is simply ask that the government employees make their 10% employee share contribution towards that guaranteed lifetime pension. That's not unreasonable, but you know what? In a lot of cases around Ohio, they're not even making that 10%. They get it for free. In Columbus, right here in central Ohio, that would save the city of Columbus $41 million. You know, the other side makes a lot of discussion about keeping good police and firefighters and teachers and on the job. I want to do that. That's why this issue is so important to me. How many police and firefighters can you keep on the job in the city of Columbus for $41 million? That's the discussion. That's why getting a handle on these out-of-control benefits is so important to the taxpayers to be able to have a seat at the table. You know, most private sector employees don't get a lifetime guaranteed pension that in many cases has a value of in excess of $1 million. It's time to level the playing field. It's time to put the taxpayers at the table, and that's why these discussions are important. Toledo, for example, had to eliminate its road paving program so it could keep paying the pension pickup for government employees. I don't think that's a good deal for people who live in Toledo. That's the discussion. That's what this debate's all about.
You have a chance for a 30-second rebuttal, if you want.
You know, I'm just shocked that somehow to suggest that veterans who have served this nation and are entitled to the recompense, as President Lincoln said they deserve for upholding freedom, somehow are on the gravy train with a guaranteed pension. I resent the fact, simply put, that those who have in fact already contributed, as so many have, giving back more than $1 billion under the current collective bargaining agreement, are sometimes swept aside. And I am particularly incensed about the simple fact that somehow it is the public employees' fault that this problem began with.
Mr. Faber, would you get rid of the pension system if you were starting from
Absolutely
scratch?
not. We're doing pension reform in this state because it's necessary. And one of the things we have to do in that pension reform is align that benefit structure with the ability for the taxpayers to pay, but also with the public expectations. So we're not getting rid of the pension system. All we're doing in Senate Bill 5, Issue 2, is just asking government employees not to have a free ride anymore, for them to pay their 10% employee share. And that's why this discussion amazes me when I hear about veterans. We didn't talk about veterans. We're talking about police and firemen. This is all about whether or not we're going to have a system that is out of touch with the private sector's ability to pay for the taxpayers.
Tom, you got the next question to Mr. Faber.
Right, for Mr. Faber again. Let's talk a little bit about the phenomenon that the media has come to dub Grannygate. In the last couple of weeks, a 78-year-old great-grandmother, Marlene Quinn from the Cincinnati area, has stepped into the spotlight in this debate. She appeared in an ad for opponents of Issue 2, but the group you're supporting, Building a Better Ohio, used her in another TV ad urging a yes vote. She says that stole her words and twisted their meaning. She demands an apology, still demanding an apology. Should she get an apology? Will she get an apology? And don't today's poll numbers show that strategy is backfired?
Well, I can't comment specifically on the strategy in the ads, but I can comment on what she talked about, and I agree with her. I agree that it's important that our families have safety and can anticipate fire services. And in her case, what she was talking about is thanking the firefighters who saved her great-granddaughter. God bless them. I'm glad they were there to do it. This bill, Issue 2, makes those firefighters more available and more likely to be there. You know what the other side, the Cincinnati firefighters, asked for when they went into contract negotiations? They said, give us the money and the benefits we want, or lay off all the younger firefighters, or get rid of other public service. That's not a sustainable outcome long-term for Ohio. What's going to protect your families more? Asking police and firefighters to pay 15% for the cost of their health care and 10% towards their pension, or laying them off? Because that's the outcome when you don't have the money to pay the generous benefits. Let me just bring this full circle. You know, in Mercer County, my home county, just asking county employees, and by the way, there is no union negotiating with the county, just asking Mercer County employees to pay 15% towards the cost of their health care saves $232,000 for the county. I asked our chief deputy, that's the equivalent of 5 sheriff deputies that we can add. If you're a Mercer County resident and taxpayer like I am, which one's better for your family? Which one's going to provide better safety for your family? 5 more sheriff deputies or county employees not paying 15% for their health care?
So, no, I mean, the question was about the apology? You don't feel as if it's your
I'm
place,
not in a
or-
position to give the apology or not give the apology. I didn't do the ads, and I've seen part of them, but I haven't seen the whole ads.
Mr. Eckert.
You know, I'll just start with what, Granny Quinn had to say. I've been with her and traveled with her. She said they must have thought they could have gotten away with this, Tom, simply because she's a little old lady. What that calls into question is the character of their campaign. The fact that the Tea Party in some ways had it right, that they grew tired of politicians who will absolutely say anything and do anything just to win the election. They stopped thinking about the next generation, Grandma Quinn's granddaughter, Zoe, and only focus on winning that next election. That first generation after us is so important. Being willing to say anything, to do anything, to make your point, to try to somehow make a no seem no. You know, Senator, she said that no means no. A deliberate attempt by your campaign to turn a no into a yes is completely consistent with the efforts that you have made to try to portray public employees as not making significant sacrifices in the collective bargaining process, which they have done to the tune of more than $1 billion in givebacks. The important thing to note is that, in fact, this bill prohibits our trained professionals from seeking the staffing, equipment, and training they need to make the judgment that makes a difference. You know, frankly, politicians, the closest they ever get to a fire is their barbecue grill on the 4th of July. I trust the firefighters to rescue Zoe more than I trust you.
You have a 30-second rebuttal. Go ahead.
Again, Dennis, I just hate to set the facts straight for you, but here's what we're talking about. Whether or not you want fewer firefighters and policemen on the job, or whether you want those policemen and firefighters to have benefits that the public can no longer afford. And what's happened over and over again is when you go to negotiate for those benefits, they say, well, we want to keep our benefits very, very much, just lay off more people. You know, that's, as I mentioned before, an interesting discussion. I'm very happy that there's been concessions, particularly since Senate Bill 5 was passed. And in fact, as one school district superintendent in my community said about some of those concessions you keep relying on, is that if you think we would have got those concessions from the union without Senate Bill 5 or Issue 2, you're mistaken. I can tell you that Issue 2 saved 5 school teachers in that superintendent's districts, because that's his words. He was in the negotiations. That's why this is so important.
All right, very quickly, respond to that. The concessions happening now after the threat of
Some
SB 5
of these
and
concessions,
Issue 2.
Chuck, began in 2008 in Solon, a district decided and commended by this own state as one of distinction and excellence. Not only did they give back step increases, which were pay raise opportunities, they gave back current salary opportunities. I won't go into the kinds of strong-arm tactics that Solon superintendent has used against his teachers because of their aggressive support in terms of their own district and the context of Senate Bill 5. What I still tell is simply this. These are public officials. They have families and kids and contribute to our communities in ways way beyond simple employment.
All right, Cherie, you have the next question.
Mr. Eckert, in the private sector, most people get raises based on their job performance. Why shouldn't teachers and other public employees be held to that same standard?
Without a doubt, teachers are regularly graded by their parents, students, school board. Cherie, let me ask you, you've got a teacher, I'll bet, that you remember in your career who made a fundamental difference in your life. That one man or one woman has impacted not only yourself into a career of distinction in journalism, but into a life and an opportunity of advocacy for communication. Every single one of us knows that kind of teacher. Every single one of us has had that kind of coach. Every single one of us has called for our grandmother or our grandfather when they stumble down the stairs or try to figure out how to cope with a life-ending illness. The simple fact is that these caregivers who serve, save, and nurture us are responsible for a quality of life that makes the fundamental difference. What we need to acknowledge is that, yes, public employees may in fact only be 7% of Ohioans. But the fact is that those 7% protect 100% of Ohio. And without them, the quality of our life would suffer dramatically.
Go ahead, Mr. Faber.
The discussion on whether or not we're going to do performance-based compensation for education is over. Barack Obama, George Bush, most all of the leading experts in the field have said you've got to go to merit-based, performance-based compensation for education. It's the only way we're going to improve the system. Now, the discussion as to what that means is still open, and that's one of the beautiful things about Issue 2. We leave that to negotiate between the teachers and the local school districts as to what those standards are. There are some guardrails in place. Guardrails like you need to look at student merit, not in one test, but over a 3-year period. You need to look at parental input. You need to look at that peer review thing that I mentioned that I added before at the request of one of the teachers' unions. You need to look at parental input and ultimately other factors that you can come up with. That's one of the best things in my mind about Issue 2 is the concept that we're actually going to make the education system work for the kids instead of just working for the adults. You know, I've had the pleasure of seeing my son's first grade teacher in the classroom, and I've had the pleasure of seeing my son's kindergarten teacher last year. If I could, I'd pay them both $1 million a year because they're great teachers. The reality is taxpayers can't afford $1 million a year, but we can pay good teachers more, and we can pay good teachers to give the incentive for those teachers who need a little help to get a little better. That's why performance-based compensation works, and that's why it's so important for Ohio.
All right, time for a quick 2-minute break. It's been a spirited and civil discussion. We will continue right after this.